everybody. I am Marina Malaguti, and I'm your host at Unbossed. Unbossed is a podcast I've created to highlight women with amazing paths of success here in Chicago. Last year, I set out to interview the only 40 female CTOs in the city, and this year I've expanded to female CEOs and women in politics and government in Chicago. I'm excited to share these interviews with you, and I hope you contact me at www.unbossed.io or email me at marina@unbossed.io. Hope to see you soon.
Maria Elaine Hadden is a Chicago politician and community activist. She's a member of Chicago City Council, serving as alderman for the city's 49th ward. She won election to that office after defeating 28-year incumbent Joe Moore in the 2019 aldermanic elections. The 49th ward includes most of Rogers Park and portion of West Ridge. Hadden was born in Columbus, Ohio in 1981. She earned her bachelor's degree in International Peace and Conflict Studies from the Ohio State University and subsequently moved to Waukegan, Illinois to begin a job with the AmeriCorps VISTA program in 2003. She moved to Chicago in 2004 and she later earned her master's degree in International Public Service Management from DePaul University. Before becoming Alderwoman, Maria Hadden was the executive director of her city, Our Voice, a national nonprofit organization she founded to enable communities and government across the country to redesign democracy for more empowered and equitable participation. Her expertise in public participation is grounded in grassroots organizing efforts for social change. Before launching her organization, Maria was a founding board member of the Participatory Budgeting Project, where she worked for 8 years with communities and government officials in the Midwest and South to create and facilitate democratic processes around the public budgets. In this role, Maria also worked with aldermen throughout Chicago to design participatory budgeting processes around aldermanic menu money, school budgets, and TIF funds. Maria lives with her partner Natalia and their 2 rescue dogs in Rogers Park. She enjoys living in a place where neighbors are friends and community is family, and she's proud of her community's resilience and motivation to work together in difficult situations. In her free time, Maria is a photographer and artist who leads a screen printing workshop for young people. Welcome, Maria.
Hey everybody, I'm Marina back at Unbossed. Today I want to welcome Maria Hadden. She is the 49th Ward Alderwoman. Welcome, Maria.
Thanks for having me on.
So, first of all, being an alderwoman, right? Tell us a little bit about the responsibilities of your role.
Sure. So, alder people in Chicago, right, are the elected representatives on city council. In Chicago, we have 50 wards, which is what we call our districts, and an alder person to represent each of those wards. I serve a ward of about 55,000 constituents, and we're geographically located like northeast, the furthest northeast you can go in the city of Chicago. Yes. So we've got the lake at the east, and we've got Evanston to the north, right? Different cities. Our most basic duties, if you distill kind of down to what's in our state constitution of what we're supposed to do, it's about kind of just overseeing city operations and approving a budget, right? City of Chicago has a pretty large budget. In the multiple billions of dollars, and everything from your garbage pickup to the conditions of our roads. If you want to think about, management of law enforcement or what we're doing on environmental issues, those can fall into the role of what city government does. And as alderperson, I am the representative for those residents in the ward to have a voice in city government, and to help make sure we're getting services.
Nice. Well, thank you for that. Well, that was very well said summary. And so you were talking a little bit about your ward. The 49th ward is, if I'm not wrong, about 50% people of color, between Black and Hispanic, 40% white, 10% other ethnicity, if you will.
You have Loyola University, like you said, you have the beach. What are some of the things that are most prominent, most common or popular about your ward that you hear people talk about?
Sure. I'll say this is the first neighborhood that I lived in when I moved to Chicago in 2004. And a lot of what either people who live here or people who come and visit here, I think some of the words that come to mind for Rogers Park is definitely diverse, right? And that can sound kind of cliche, but as you mentioned with their demographics, outside of, or maybe underneath those like kind of general racial kind of ethnic group breakdowns, we're a diverse community because of a lot of immigrants and refugees that have made Rogers Park their home, and over decades, right? So we're a very affordable neighborhood. We have a lot of apartments, right? We're 70% rental. And with the university nearby, with the great transportation we have, with like 4 red line stops and a metro station and several bus lines, this has just long been an affordable neighborhood. And so, especially with refugee resettlement, we've just gotten waves of people from different countries and different cultures for decades and decades. And so we have like over 80 languages spoken in the neighborhood.
Wow.
So like when you look at the racial numbers, that's certainly diverse for Chicago, but baked in there are, you can like eat around the world here. We've got fantastic restaurants, and you can get, your Eritrean cuisine, and you can get your, Belizean food, and you can get your Indian food, right?
Wow.
And you can certainly get like your Mexican food, and you can get some Peruvian food. And so like, there's just so many people who live here and live here in a pretty harmonious way, right? A very integrated community in that sense. Definitely the lakefront is a defining characteristic. So we're further north than Lakeshore Drive. So if you're someone who lives in another part of Chicago, or if you just visited the city, right, we've got this iconic drive that, kind of on the east of it are big parks and the lake, and on the west of it is the city and a lot of the downtown. And we're so far north that we're, beyond Lakeshore Drive, but that means we don't have a separation between us and the lake. So we've got, homes that are right on the park, and really a lot of accessible public access to the lake that you don't find in many places in the city. That's pretty fantastic. And then lastly, I'd say we're really defined by that mix of arts and activism. So we're definitely a community that has long been very vocally politically, very left progressive, lots of activists, and as I think just goes hand in hand, lots of artists. So a pretty rich community in that sense. And that's certainly been the way it is since before I came here, and still holds true in what people think of when they think of Rogers Park.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, quick side note, congratulations of your first year in office. I know.
Second year.
Second year in office. Yes, second year in office. I
know last year feels like it didn't count.
Yes, second year.
Yeah.
And I know it was like about May 2 years ago, right? So
yeah,
it's just
May 20th. Mm-hmm.
So you just finished, or you just completed your second year in office. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
How long does an alderwoman serve? How many years?
4 years. So this is like the halfway point of the term, right? So we have 4-year terms, and no term limits, right? So that's why you end up getting alder people in office for like 40 and 50 years. The person that I replaced, that I beat in election, was alderperson for 28 years. So you can get stuck with an alderman for a long time in Chicago if you're not careful.
That's crazy. That is really a long time.
It's a long time.
So you're halfway through your term. How are you feeling about the position?
Mm-hmm.
About the issues that come up with constituents? About, did you think at the beginning, starting this off, it was going to be the way it is? Or what surprises did you get?
Sure. All good questions. So I'm feeling good, right? So I'm feeling good 2 years in. I'm also having your first 2 years be marked with a global pandemic and all of the tragedy, the challenges, the changes that come with that is certainly not what I expected. And at the same time, I feel pretty good about what I've been able to accomplish with both some of my colleagues in council, but certainly my team, my staff here in the ward service office, and also I feel some uncertainty, right, about what the next 2 years will bring. And I feel like that's something totally outside of my role. Like, I'm sure we're all feeling some uncertainty, right, about what the next year is going to bring.
Exactly.
But knowing that it's, beyond myself and my own life, and knowing that the role that I get to play in our community is one of representation, but also one of service. And so there can be a lot of expectations and pressure, especially in times of high need, when everything is changing, and it is very demanding. And I'll say that those are all aspects that I expected, and everything has been intensified over the last year, right? So it's all multiplied to factors that I probably did not anticipate when I started. But it is still really a privilege to be able to be in a position where I can help people.
Yeah,
right? Like I can't help everyone, and I can't solve everything. But making sure that my office is a resource, and that I'm able to use my role to bring as many resources to our community has been important, and also felt good, right, in this time where so much uncertainty has been surrounding us.
That's beautiful. What has been an example of that feeling good about bringing something back to the community recently that you can give us?
I'll give you two. So one was on the legislative side. So we have a lot of senior citizens in the ward and in our city, right? And through the pandemic, these were one of our most vulnerable populations of people. And an organization, Jane Addams Senior Caucus, which is comprised of and organizes for senior citizens in our area, approached my office with some real impacts that they were seeing from the pandemic, especially of seniors who were living in senior apartments. So people living independently, right? But in, 55 and plus communities. And they saw a real need of, wow, during a public health crisis, when a particularly vulnerable person, like an elder, doesn't feel safe or isn't actually safe going to the store or doing this, and how do they get their medicine? How do they get their groceries? Information's changing like every 12 hours. And so they approached our office, and we worked with them on legislation to bring more protections for seniors in housing. So our senior safety ordinance, it was the first major legislation that I got to pass.
Nice.
We passed it in pretty record time, actually. Legislation can take a long time. And it had a meaningful, right, like this was written with seniors' experience, with direct remedies to things that they needed management companies to do that were above and beyond what they would normally need, but in the middle of a public health crisis were very important. So that felt really good, and it was difficult. But that was great. And then I'll say, even really recently, so I do a constituent night or ward night where people can kind of schedule appointments and just talk one-on-one. And I spoke with a woman yesterday who actually had to leave Chicago during the pandemic. Younger woman, an immigrant, 2 kids, and she was able to keep her employment and appreciate her employer, but with the childcare changes and the school closures, she wasn't able to find childcare, so she actually had to relocate to a different state to be near some family for her 10 and 6-year-old. And she called and scheduled this appointment to talk to me because she wants to come back home. She wants to come back to Chicago, and she knows that she can, you know, find employment, but she might need a month's rent, right? She's like, I, you know, have a line on some housing and I want to come back to the community, but I might need a month's rent because I don't know how quickly I can get to work, and she has no savings, right? And, you know, we've got some great community organizations who specifically have some rental and hardship assistance funds. And so I was able to offer her that resource and connect her to it. And she cried on the phone because she told me she has such a hard time asking for help. And she wished she had called me earlier because she's someone who, we don't know each other very well, but we see each other on the street because she cleans an apartment building that's down the street from where I live. And she sees me and my wife when we're out walking our dog. And she only called me really as a last resort. And, you know, those are small things, right? But they're meaningful things and they feel wonderful. And like on my best days, it's like, oh, well, like that's why I'm here and what I want my office to be, right? A resource for people. So, yeah.
That's beautiful. That's a really awesome story. Congratulations on both count. One, passing legislation is important because that's, I think, systematic change, but also, you know, helping the individual is just as meaningful and important. And that's awesome what you're doing. So thank you for the work that you're spearheading. I'm thinking about how I want to go here, but I think what I'll have you do is I want to take a step back in the life of Maria Hadden and talk about, can you give us some context about who were you growing up as a little girl? And maybe hindsight 2020, did you see any threads of political involvement or activism now that you can look back and think about you as a younger self?
Like yes and no. So I am not that different now than I was as a child or a young adult even. And not just through my own lens, but I'll just tell you from objective people who know me. I've always, I like problem solving. I've always wanted to work in public service, even before knowing what that meant. And I'll say, you know, there are influences in our lives, right, outside of ourselves that sometimes push us in certain directions. For me, I tell people definitively, in 8th grade, my school, we got I got the opportunity to be trained as like a peer mediator. So we got this peer mediation program for a time through the 90s. The state of Ohio, and I grew up in Columbus, the state of Ohio actually had a whole state office that was resourced to focus on alternative dispute resolution, and was one of the leaders in the nation actually in it. Before some political regime changes and defunding of programs like alternative dispute resolution. But there were some great women who ran a small nonprofit called the Interfaith Center for Peace. And they developed a great peer mediation program. They were both retired school teachers. They believed a lot in peer-to-peer like education and mentoring with young people, and were just super great at youth empowerment. So in 8th grade, this program came to my school district, and I got to be trained for this program in my school. But these two women, so Madeline Trishelle and Jody Davis, also believed in youth, kind of leading youth. And so at each of the trainings they would actually give us applications as young people to come and work for them. Like, hey, we hire young people to do this as well. And so it was my first job. Like, I was so excited.
How old were you?
I was 14,
Okay.
8th grade. Yeah. That summer, I also had my other first job, which was working at a Subway as a sandwich artist. So I also made, but yeah, they hired us to do trainings, right? So when I was 14, mediation and doing this form of conflict management, one was supernatural to me. Very much enjoyed it, liked it. Liked thinking objectively and hearing people's sides of stories and then helping them to come to solutions, like literally. I got to also then do trainings for elementary students. And we got to travel around the state with other folks my age and some of high school kids, right? And help train adults and students in other school districts. So I worked with them doing these trainings all the way up through college. Super defining, both in kind of non-traditional work and being exposed to different types of work that's available, and also in pretty early in my life introducing me to something that I was skilled at, right? Like, we all have different sets of skills, but we don't always necessarily have opportunities available for us to discover as young people what those skills might be, or to practice them, or to like perfect them. So I'm really good at problem solving and mediating conflicts. And so I never thought of myself as running for office. Never thought I would work in government in the elected sense, but certainly it shaped what I decided to study in college, which was international peace and conflict studies. It defined what my mom thought I would do. She thought I was going to be the next Kofi Annan. She's like, you're going to be a UN peace negotiator. You're going to run the United Nations. And that's like where you're going. She was for sure, right, when I was in high school. And so it's the running for elected office piece definitely came from a lot of outside pressure and a lot of people asking me to. But I'll say the skills of what have kind of that define some of my personality, but also that lead me towards certain areas of work are certainly applicable in this role. But I'll say I am becoming increasingly aware that the type of diplomatic or kind of dispute resolution or mediator kind of mindset is not very common in elected officials.
Yes. What is the norm amongst? Is it shouting and who has the most power and influence? That type of mediation happens.
It's certainly not trying to understand other people's perspectives and bring people together for compromise. Yeah. And that's, 2 years in, I'll say that's as specific as I can get. There's a lot more, and this isn't to cast it in, this isn't a judgment of what's better or not better, right? Because different qualities get us different things. And different skills are necessary, right? There's not one right way to accomplish stuff. But certainly some of the qualities that I notice that are more present, that are things that I'm not necessarily as good at, might be more in negotiating towards individual wins, which is a different skill, right? It's a different skill. So folks who might be really good at negotiating and manipulating a situation or fighting in a situation to a very intentional goal, maybe for their community, right? Because it's not always about an individual. It's not necessarily rooted in selfishness. Sometimes, people are like, this is what my community needs. This is what they put me here for. I have a single-minded, right, to the exclusion of all else. So that's what I'm going to do. And that's a different skill set, right? So there are different things. And then, of course, there are people drawn to politics just because they like politics, and there is plenty of drama, right, and conflict to be had, and yeah, some people just like that.
Yeah.
So not exactly my cup of tea. So.
Yeah. I don't want to diminish your skill that you have learned for so many years, but I would love a few tips on how to mediate a situation.
Sure.
A peer-to-peer little class tidbits. So we are in a situation in which usually like set up the situation and help me figure out how does one go about it in the way you've learned it to do the peer-to-peer mediation.
Sure. I could say important things, and these are general things anybody can practice, right? Like, one, if you're working on kind of trying to mediate a conflict, whether this is in your household, right? So like these are like anyone can do this, right?
With the kids? Can we do it with the kids?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to try this on my kids.
You do it with the kids. The kids can do it with the parents.
Whoa.
Yes.
Okay.
But like in your workplace with your friends. So one is like trying to establish some ground rules, right? So in a typical mediation, it's like, all right, one, people have to kind of willingly want to solve a problem. That's a big thing. So like, hey, you know what? I noticed there's this conflict happening. You know, do you guys want to come to some solution, right? So an agreement, right? People have to kind of consent to wanting to be in a process. And then in establishing those ground rules, it's like, getting some agreement, like, do you want to try and solve the problem? Like, hey, can we agree to not call each other names? Right? Like whatever those ground rules need to be in the situation, right? Hey, can we agree not to interrupt each other because let's hear. You know, typically then, you know, if you're in that mediator position, you want to hear both sides of the story. Making sure that you are a good listener, giving people a chance to be heard is super important. And having like a third party intervention sometimes is one of the best setups for that type of solution, right? Great, party A, tell me what happened. Let me hear it in your own words. And you get to just like uninterrupted, without judgment, like share what's going on. Let me understand where you're coming from. Great, party B, party C gets the same thing. Half the time, especially in interpersonal conflicts, half the time your solution comes up then and you're already working at de-escalating a conflict, right? Or solving a problem. Because half the time when you've got, you know, conflict between people, most of the thing you've just been in this hot state and you're just not listening and you might not even be arguing about the same thing, right? And then typically moving to a phase where you start getting these parties talking to one another. So maybe, you know, we use I statements or kind of prompts of, okay, well, now that you've each heard each other, you know, maybe, hey, you know, do you want to tell us something that you think we're not understanding? You know, is there something that's bothering you, or how did this thing that happened make you feel? Getting people to answer questions like that in kind of closed-ended ways also helps us the person being asked internally start to identify what it is that's really bothering them. It also helps to take people out of an emotional state, right? And into less reactivity and more like thinking. And then as a mediator, you're also listening for those solutions, right? Because sometimes people they're saying what they need, right? They're telling you what they need. And, you know, maybe they're not even hearing it themselves. So, you know, allowing parties to kind of communicate in that way. And then as a mediator, you can be helpful in sometimes reflecting back what you've heard, right? So you're not putting words in people's mouths, but sometimes even literally repeating back, you know what, I heard you say this, earlier. Tell me more about that. You know, is this still how you feel? And then you literally ask people, right? What do you need, right? Like, what do you need in order to feel like you are getting some resolution? What do you need from this person? What do you need in general? And then working to some agreement on a personal level. Again, if you're talking about some peers, some friends, your children, your family members, coming to an agreement, like, great, okay. You know what? We've all been confined to a space together for a long time. And what I'm hearing you say is maybe you need some personal space where your sibling is not with you sometimes. And can we come to an agreement and figure that out? And then let's try it. So there are some things of it that are, you can scale that up or scale that down, right? It's big or little, as you can think of it. But a lot of it from the mediator role is facilitating a process, providing a buffer, setting a tone, like, you know, your own energy and approach to things can help to ground people. You can sometimes offer perspectives just by listening to what people say, and sharing back what you've heard, and sometimes that offers different perspectives for people to help them get out of their own perspective. So there, again, lots of applicable skills in politics.
That's a great, thank you for that. That's a great summary for how to facilitate a mediation, and I'm definitely going to use this on my kids now. And I'll tell you how it goes. So expect an email from me saying,
"There you go.
I don't know what they're doing. Honestly, they don't want to collaborate. They don't really want to reach an agreement." That's usually how it goes with them.
How old are they?
So I have a baby, newborn, 4 months old, 4 and 8.
Okay.
So here we go. My mediation, my 30-second training on mediation. Here we go. No,
there you go. You can go now. Yeah.
There's a lot of things that I think we do, you know, as professionals and parents, that is already part of mediation. I think I would love to hear like a quick opinion about like empowering them and to learn the skill and to learn how to mediate conflict for themselves versus having a third party involved. And this, I think, goes also with adults a lot of times, where it would be nice to be able to empower other adults to not need a third party to, you know, mediate conflict.
No, absolutely. And I'll say, when I think about those early experiences and what that training offered. So one, outside of, you know, kind of empowerment and me being able to find some skills and develop confidence and have experiences, it's certainly, I use these skills all the time in my own life, right, to manage conflict, either internal conflict with myself or, you know, just, you know, with my family, right, with my coworkers in my community. So there's certainly things that are applicable outside of a third-party mediation situation, because anything that encourages more self-awareness, right, introspection, forcing you to have other perspectives, and to use some kind of analysis of situations, tends to make you better at problem solving. So when you find yourself in situations of conflict, you've got just an additional set of tools, right, available to you. So definitely.
Absolutely. Does your wife ever be like, "Here you go again with your mediation skills"?
Yeah, she doesn't say it that way, but yes, she definitely. Sometimes she'll be like, "Don't use that voice with me," right? Which I imagine is probably maybe what people who are married to therapists, right? Like, feel like, "Hey, don't put on your therapy voice with me," right? Something she'll be like, "No." Yeah.
She's like, "We're gonna fight it out old school, and you're just gonna put those skills away for a second."
But I'll also say just as much too. She definitely uses some of those skills.
Of
too,
course,
right?
yeah, of course. It's like great.
Absolutely.
It's like the greatest strength, and also like times I understand it could be like, "Oh my God, no, I don't. I just want to fight it out today."
Sometimes people just want to argue. That's true.
Yeah. So you're obviously a quite successful woman in government. You're a member, board of directors for Black Youth Project. You were an executive director for Our City, Our Voice. You're also a member of board of directors for Vocal. Am I saying that correctly? Yeah.
It's just Vocal.
Vocal. Okay.
I know the Q is weird.
Vocal. And finally at some point you ran for Alderwoman. Do you want to tell me a little bit about like your career progression? And for people that are listening, like Maria has an MS in she was talking about having a Master of Science in International Public Service Management. But would you tell me about like your career progression and how is, if someone is interested about becoming or becoming an elected official for the city of Chicago, whether it's alderwoman, and I know each position is different, but
sure.
Generally an elected official, like what does that career progression was like for you? And then do you have any tips for people that may want to start being more involved?
Sure. So good questions. It's a little different for me, but probably, in comparison to other folks, I'll say especially in local elected office, right?
Yeah.
So even though Chicago is a pretty big city and, compared to other city councils, I have a lot of constituents. It'd be like in, LA or New York, right? These are big cities, but it's still local government. And I do think that sometimes the paths to like local elected office can be pretty different than what people are thinking of like a congressperson or a senator, right? Or the president or a governor. And so locally, and I'll say before being in office in my nonprofit work, most of my work was also with local elected officials, right? So I managed projects like in the Midwest and Southern United States and in a few other places. And I worked most likely with local elected officials. So though my schooling started with this international focus, right? I really fell in love with just like place where I was, which is always funny to me. I'm like, I love international travel and had these like kind of global thoughts, right? And then once I started living in a place and getting involved in a place, and for me, again, there were outside influences to my personal trajectory, right? So when I was in grad school for that master's in public service management, so intending to, continue working in a nonprofit, going into some management position in a nonprofit and thinking kind of more career-minded, right? In that sense. I had purchased my first home right at the height of the bubble before the housing crisis. So was in a space where a lot of people at the end who were like me, right? People who had never owned a home before. I think a lot of working class people, like, my mom, owns her home now, but didn't until I was like in 5th grade. And so this idea of home ownership, I think, has really been drilled into a lot of the American success story, right? So I was, a young professional finishing grad school and things looked really great. So bought a home. Bought a condo in Rogers Park and that I could afford and with all these guidelines. And then everything fell apart. So I ended up spending a few years actually working with my neighbors to try and save our homes. So we had a developer that took all of our money, but only finished half the building, and he fled the country and left us with a lot of problems and with the potential of our building even being condemned. And so that personal organizing, like that need of I have to do something because otherwise I will not be able to live here. Right? Like I have a pressing need and a problem. Yeah. So those things that the personal need that can drive you to like really local organizing was super unique, but also helped me take probably my first deep dive into city government. Mm-hmm. So that was before I was introduced to participatory budgeting, before any of that. And it meant that I got a deep dive in this neighborhood. I met so many neighbors because I went looking for answers and I went looking for solutions and did a lot of building networks and trying to save our building. And that is usually how I think of the start of my path to elected office, was really developing a deep relationship with my neighborhood. And a deep relationship with my community over multiple years. And so especially for folks interested in politics, like in government, from that respect, that's usually the first piece of advice that I give, is whether it's a place you grew up in or a place that you've moved to and adopted as your home, you need to get involved. You need to get to know the people. You need to find something you're passionate about, whether it's through direct need or through some other connection that you've got. And you need to find and build connections to that place. And that connection to place helps to build a foundation, both of your understanding of your community, but also it's certainly what motivates me, right? In those positive ways. Also, right, people are insane in my neighborhood too, right? In the best way. People ask you all kinds of things. Last weekend, I spent time dealing with, and this was so unique, and there will always be unique stories. There was a Facebook post of a photo that somebody had made. They made this because we investigated it, and it wasn't really official, but it looked like an official permit sign from the Chicago Park District allowing for a citizen burial in the park.
Whoa!
It said citizen burial, okay? And it had the name of this woman and that she was going to be interred at 5 p.m. on Sunday. And I spent a couple of days trying to figure out, are somebody trying to bury a body in the park? Or are they just interring ashes? Is this even real? Did the park district permit? So like, there's all kinds of also just like off the wall things that come your way in your community. But it does not diminish my love of Rogers Park or the 49th Ward. So there's that too, right? Like committing yourself to a place and a people in a community is a big commitment. And it comes with a lot of reward, but can also come with a lot of responsibility. And so I'd say from my perspective, which was only one person's perspective, if you're thinking of elected office, you've got to have that. You've got to have that connection if you're going to be a good representative. There are multiple paths to get there. But again, this is one local elected official's perspective.
That's beautiful. No, thank you for that. It's really helpful. And Chicago government can be, well, I'm speaking of the Chicago because I'm here, but it can be so convoluted sometimes that people don't even know where to start or, how to get into it. So getting involved at the community level seems like a very smart first step.
Absolutely.
We are 10 minutes from closing, and I have a few outro questions, but first I would like to talk about lessons.
Sure.
So my podcast is a lot about like, what type of lessons have you learned, either growth of personal growth or of professional growth, around, let's keep them around like leadership and in a thematic way, if you will, but you can include others if that pleases you as well, that have helped you, propel forward in your career, and or some of those lessons that you will always carry with you, that you have learned throughout this time.
Sure.
And I know it's like quite large. It's quite large of a questions, but sometimes we have those things that, we know that are things that we learned, because we tried and failed.
It's
and
true.
So it's a lot about, like not necessarily like about exposing your fears, more about like, what have you learned during this time that may seem counterintuitive for yourself at the moment, or some of those lessons about leadership that you did not know about that you had to learn?
The first thing that pops to mind, and I'll say some of these are like lessons in progress, right?
Yes.
Lessons put it that way. Lessons in progress.
There wouldn't be lessons. I feel like it were in progress. They would be like they would be already skills.
Yeah, right. So lessons in progress. Leadership and like good leadership comes in many forms and in different styles, right? Like there's not one way to be a leader. Yeah. And I feel like that's a thing that I've been learning my whole life. I frequently gravitate to leadership roles and have a lot of, I'll say, quote unquote, natural leadership skills, at least within our kind of social cultural context, right, in the United States. But stepping into like a political leadership space, right? Moving from a nonprofit leader space or even like a neighborhood community organizer leader space. Different fields have different, there are all kinds of different expectations and ways in which I'm comfortable being a leader in one thing don't always translate the same, right? And it's sometimes a challenge for me to, and has been a challenge in this first couple of years especially, to adapt to the additional influence that I have in this role. Right? So both in, there's the really clear connection of being an elected representative, and those relationships are very clear. But I do have a bigger platform now, and different people pay attention, and different people listen, and different people care and have emotional responses to what I do and I don't do. And that is both deeply uncomfortable for me, right? And also has meant that I need to adjust and think about different things, both in like responsibility, but also it's having to navigate a relationship with power, right?
I like that. Yeah, I like that you equate leadership and almost like political stardom, quote unquote stardom. I'm quoting because it's a type of with responsibility. Because I feel the same way about it. What is an example that you can give me about this that can resonate?
So I'll give you an example that is, I'm a very responsible person, and friends and family. My family told me I was 27 years old when I was born because I've always been like old and boring. Yeah. They like it as old and boring. Like, oh, Maria's so responsible, asking us questions about things that we don't really want to think about. And I ask myself those questions a lot. And so I'm a really deliberate decision maker. And so I don't tend to have problems with making irresponsible choices. But an example will be like our last budget vote for the city. I ended up voting for this budget, and it was super controversial. And there were a subset of folks in our community, both within this ward and the city, that are part of communities that I'm in, who were very disappointed. And we had a big process. I had lots of conversations with people and fully met my responsibilities and obligations, right? In the sense of not just my role, but my personal values and the things that I hold dear on accountability and in explaining and understood consequences of people being in disagreement with me very much, but didn't understand people's emotional attachment to, in some ways, maybe a perception they had of me that was a perception, but not necessarily reality, or even the feelings and the attachments that people might have. The fact that people have attachments to me,
but they didn't know you, right?
Yeah, they didn't know me. Like some people who knew me, but like people who didn't know me, and that was a real important lesson, because whether I like it or not, it is a reality. And that means that there are added layers of responsibility and considerations, right, to think about and to understand impacts and consequences of decisions. And then on the flip side of that, there are also people care what you say, and my voice has power in different spaces. And that means in the political sphere, and I'm sure it's in any professional sphere, but in the political sphere, that also means that me doing my job and doing what I think is right and representing residents of the ward and also the city can mean that I rub other people the wrong way. And for someone who, as I have told you, right, has spent so much time in conflict management and mediation, that can feel very uncomfortable for me. Because it's not just in trying to manage conflict, but I also tend to personally be a person who's very tolerant and very open for people having differing and opposing opinions. And me not agreeing with you on something doesn't mean that we can't get along or work together towards other shared goals.
Yeah.
However, there are a lot of perceived slights. There are a lot of things people just won't like about you because you said something about something that we had a big council meeting yesterday, and affordable housing development was approved right next to an asphalt plant. I don't know if you saw this, but like,
I saw that.
It came up in zoning. It's wrong. We shouldn't put low-income housing next to environmental hazards. I had no qualms about speaking out about it and trying to convince my colleagues to bring in more environmental considerations and to delay a vote, right? Because it's a good project if it weren't next to an asphalt plant. It's going to specifically serve people making 30% to 80% of the income, and we rarely get affordable housing that's that affordable, right? They're going to be beautiful, repurposed, adaptive reuse buildings. It's a beautiful project, and that asphalt plant shouldn't be there. And me raised concerns amongst colleagues, and it turned into like a whole shit show yesterday in council, and more people than I expected, because I didn't explicitly organize to end the project. I did share my thoughts with a handful of colleagues and express my concerns, and I asked them just to consider their decision, because our decisions have consequences. And I know that I've rubbed some people the wrong way, and there are some people in powerful positions in my city council who probably won't talk to me for a long time, because I raised really good questions and made a decision that's not just right for the ward, but for the community. But that went at odds with something and some other needs that they had. And that conflict happens, and it's productive and it's good. But it also means that it's also learning what impact. Like, I was surprised that so many people spoke up in city council yesterday.
Wow.
Pleasantly surprised.
That's awesome.
But also sometimes having influence also then can make you a target when it comes to politics.
Well, I applaud you for speaking up. I applaud you for fighting for what is good and right. So thank you for doing that. We've heard about too many low-income projects that have been put next to environmental hazards already. We don't need more of those. So absolutely, personally agree with this cause. So, but that is applaudable. So thank you for doing that work.
Yeah, but yeah, definitely falls into the lessons learned, and it's a continuing lesson learned, because when you're in the public face, all of your actions have consequences. Mm-hmm. And you don't always know how those consequences play out. And so it's probably it takes being brave, and it's kind of weird, right? Like, you have to be brave and sometimes take more risks than I might normally. But doing that on behalf of other people is kind of what people elect you to do, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. And I have to say that while you said you're learning this lesson, you're also putting your messages out there. I see you active on TikTok, on Facebook. You have a newsletter. So for everybody listening, follow Maria on all of the social media. She's really good at putting news and updates for the word out there, but also talking about bigger issues. And I've enjoyed the last few weeks reading your newsletter and getting to know the issues and the projects that you guys are working on. So that's really awesome form of communications, actually.
Well, thank you for reading the newsletter. It gets long sometimes, so I appreciate that.
Absolutely. All right. Unfortunately, our time is come to an end. But I do have a couple of just outro questions. And I'm a book lover. I'm a book reader. Also listen to podcasts and resources. Do you have a book that you have gifted the most, or that you loved recently, that you want to recommend to the audience?
Oh, sure.
It could be a podcast too, or audiobook. It doesn't matter. It's a figure.
I'll say I definitely have had some reading time over the last couple of months, and I'll list the nonfiction book that I most recently finished is, oh man, I'm going to forget the name of it because The Confidence Game. So I like to read a lot about how the brain works and how we think and how we act. And it's Maria Hadden, and it's about con artists and our brains and why we fall for cons and how they work. And while I've never been the victim of a con, influence and how we influence people is like always present. So that's interesting. And so I've recommended that to a few people. And then I'll say, not for the fiction side, I'm a N.K. Jemisin fan. And so, I just finished her 100,000 Kingdoms, the Inheritance, trilogy, which was great and fun and wonderful, and her books are so smart. But I'll say the one of her that I've been recommending is The City We Became.
Yes.
So it's actually her newest one, right? I read it last summer. But definitely thought-provoking and entertaining, and I love escaping into the worlds that other people create. Yeah. So,
and for the people that don't know N.K. Jemisin, I've recently been a fan of hers as well. She is a Black woman writing fantasy, and she does it in a very non-white cis male way, which is amazing. She also has a masterclass that she talks about her writing style and how she did all of her world building and all that good stuff. So, if you're interested, that's
it's so good.
She's really good. She's really good. What is a book you would write potentially if you had?
Oh man, I don't like writing enough to do that, but I think at some point, if I would write a book right now, it would definitely be a book just on like how much I love people. And it would probably be like a weird, quirky book about random anecdotes of all the different experiences that I have with people. It would include things like the citizen burial, right? And probably a lot of quirky stories about interactions that I have with folks in the public sector. And I would say that it's also would probably be filled with, on the more serious side, just the weird ways you interact with folks as like a Black woman, as a Black queer woman, the way people treat you and see you, and it'd be about people.
That's awesome. Yeah. That's really good. I would read that. Just so you know, sounds really interesting.
It'd be a lot of stories. I tell stories a lot. So,
lastly, tell us, what are you gonna do next? If you're thinking about next, is there another potential run for you? Are you thinking about the White House?
So I'm thinking about the next 2 years of my term, and I'll run for re-election, right? Like I'll say, it's a lot of work to get in office anywhere, right? Like anywhere, and here in this city, challenging long-term incumbents, working outside of a political machine, right? Not coming from a political dynasty, not being super connected to like an established party. It's very difficult to build the type of campaign that you can win. And there's so much work to do. So I definitely am committed to this in this space and this work, and kind of evolving the role of alderwoman for a couple of terms at least. So not going anywhere else anytime soon.
Perfect. I hope to see at least a 50-50 alderwoman, alderman split in the office in the city council soon.
Yeah, let's hope so, right?
So I'm excited because I'm hopefully some people hear this and decide to run. No matter how hard it is, we need more women in politics in our government. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being a great guest.
This was a fun conversation. So thanks for having me on.
And have a best day, and we'll chat soon again, okay? Thank you.
Awesome.
Bye.